You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the director of the Demos think tank, Polly Mackenzie, and the Daily Mail's deputy political editor, John Stevens. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages now. The Mirror says that the police have been handed a photo of the Prime Minister with a lager at a Downing Street party and that it was taken by the taxpayer-funded Number 10 photographer. The Times says there's a civil war in the Cabinet, with Boris Johnson being urged to sack the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak. The Political terms the Eye describes the Prime Minister as isolated and suggests Mr Sunak is taking centre stage. Isolated is also the word of the day for The Guardian, which reports on Mr Johnson's efforts to rally his team. The Financial Times carries accusations of hypocrisy against the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, who has recommended that people shouldn't seek pay rises in the current economic climate. The Telegraph has word of an apology from British Gas to hundreds of thousands of its customers for failing to properly maintain their boilers over the winter. And the Mail claims some Department of Health staff were told in emails that they only needed to come to the office for a minimum of 4 days a month. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we're joined tonight by Polly Mackenzie and John Stevens. Welcome to you both. Good evening. Hope you're both well. Let's start with the Mirror. And this photographic evidence has come forward, it seems, and been handed to the police. It was rumoured that there were photographs to be shared, and they have now materialised on the front of the Mirror. Polly.
Well, I mean, so much of this information is there in the headline. In a way, what's fascinating about this party around the Prime Minister's birthday is that it was reported at the time and it wasn't a big deal. But so much has changed because of what we've discovered about this culture and the repeated kind of law breaking or lockdown breaking that happened, that even tiny little sort of drip feed bits of information like this give us an opportunity to sort of rehash it all over again. The Prime Minister, by this account, there is a picture of him. Rishi Sunak is apparently standing next to him holding a soft drink. And there's something about the fact that it appears to have been taken by the official photographer. These are taxpayer-funded photographs of this lockdown breaking, not just sort of casual snaps that might have been taken on staff's phones. I mean, this story has just goes on and on and on. My daughter is 10. She has written a satirical song about the Boris Johnson parties, right? Because it's cool in the playground to laugh at the Prime Minister about parties. Like, you know, it's like the new Squid Game. It's hilarious to 10-year-olds, which is unfathomable, right? And yet it's a sense that the whole country considers this to be a bit of a joke. And this is yet another, even though it's quite a small blow, I think it runs the story for another day, doesn't it?
Polly, we'd love to get the lyrics of your daughter's song. If you can get those together for us before the 11 o'clock hour. To you, John, the fact that there was an official photographer, which suggests that there wasn't any semblance of hiding what they were doing, or that the party was something that should be kept under covers. It sort of adds insult to injury, doesn't it?
Yeah, and this is a bit of a side issue that, you know, why on earth are we, as taxpayers, paying for a photographer to take pictures of the Prime Minister in private having a birthday cake? I mean, I'm not sure at a time when everyone's tightening their belts, that's really the best use of our money. But I think the real problem here is that there are all these pictures out there. We heard last week that there were 300 photos that Sue Gray, the senior Cabinet Office official who's looked into this, has handed over to the police. And I think that the worry for a lot of Tory MPs is that they're just not able to draw a line under this rail. Boris Johnson was hoping he'd have this report with Sue Gray. He'd come out with his plan of his fight back. What was he going to do differently? But a lot of MPs are just thinking this just never goes away. And they'll be thinking now, what about if some of these photos start to trickle out? I mean, the Mirror today, they've got this story about how this photo exists. They don't actually have the photo yet. If the photo got out there, then we'd have a whole nother row about this. The government would be dealing with it again and wouldn't be getting on with dealing stuff like cost of living, COVID, etc., etc. And I think that's a real worry for backbenchers, that this just goes on forever and it never, ever ends.
And Polly, we hear this evening that Nick Gibbs, the former schools minister, submitting another letter of no confidence in the Prime Minister.
Yeah, Nick Gibb, who, I mean, as far as I can tell, seems to have served as schools minister about 37 years, or at least consistently since 2010. You know, incredibly long-serving minister, widely respected within the Conservative Party, very sensible, very measured, not a bombastic guy at all. So for him to have made this step, somebody who has been not just loyal to Boris Johnson, but loyal to Theresa May, loyal to David Cameron, I think it will send a ripple of some sorts through the more sensible and serious members of those Conservative backbenches, that, you know, there is a line that in the end you cannot cross.
John, the Times telling us that there's a civil war in the cabinet. The article describing Rishi Sunak as being on manoeuvres and being less than loyal, and also the same being said of Sajid Javid.
Yeah, so we had Rishi Sunak out yesterday. This was this row over Jimmy Savile and Keir Starmer and whether it was right for Boris Johnson to say that it was Starmer's fault that Jimmy Savile hadn't been prosecuted while he was alive. And we had Rishi Sunak out yesterday. He was saying he wouldn't have said that, which is, I think, the first time that we've had Rishi Sunak directly criticise the Prime Minister in public. We've had Sajid Javid out today. He was asked about it. He went out of his way to be very nice about Keir Starmer. He said he'd done a good job when he led the Crown Prosecution Service. And, you know, that's a real striking difference between that and Boris Johnson with what he said the other day. But the question is what happens now? And the Times is suggesting that some people in the cabinet want Boris Johnson to sack Rishi Sunak. I just can't see that happening. You know, Rishi Sunak is very popular on the Tory backbenches. A lot of people see him as someone who could potentially take over from Boris Johnson. And whilst there might be a lot of people in the Tory party who think he's being disloyal and think they might be less likely to vote for him in a leadership election because of this, I just don't think that Boris Johnson has got the authority anymore to be able to sack someone like Rishi Sunak. I think if he did that, he'd be scared that his whole government would quickly collapse because there would be other ministers that would follow, and then it would create a massive row that he wouldn't be able to survive.
Polly, the Eye saying that Rishi Sunak, wins greater influence over direction of government than ever before. Headline there saying that he's taking centre stage.
Well, there's no question that Downing Street is distracted. Downing Street also, as of this week, barely has any senior staff in it. And so that vacuum of both the Prime Minister and the team's distraction means that Rishi Sunak has more power. He is pretty much, according to most polls, the most popular politician in the country. Whether that would survive him, you know, doing a leadership election, whether he would in fact be a good and popular Prime Minister, completely different question, I think. But at the moment, he is still popular, he is liked. And whilst the Prime Minister is kind of on his uppers, that does change, I think, quite a lot of the dynamic in Westminster and in Whitehall. John's completely right, I think, that the Prime Minister is not in a position to be making big, aggressive moves to get rid of his enemies in the Conservative Party. You know, he chopped great chunks off the Conservative Party to get Brexit done and told, you know, people like Ken Clarke that they weren't welcome in the Conservative Party, literally booted them out. And so he, though he's got a larger electoral coalition, he's got a smaller kind of intellectual coalition within the Conservative Parliamentary Party. And if he starts trying to chop off great chunks of additional people because they also have the wrong view about parties or the wrong view about levelling up or the wrong whatever it is, he's going to end up completely alone. And, you know, in the end, that's not how you run a government. You have to command the confidence of the House of Commons. And that's about leadership, but it's also about recognising that you have to bind together people who disagree with you on quite a lot of stuff. That's not a skill Boris Johnson has had much in the past, but it's the one he needs now if he wants to survive.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview, still with me, Polly Mackenzie and John Stevens. There they are. Let's have a look at the Financial Times. Bailey accused of pay rise hypocrisy. This is the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, been criticised by Downing Street, call for restraint on increases in pay, unions reacting angrily. Why the hypocrisy, though, John?
So the hypocrisy is because Andrew Bailey earns £575,000 a year, which is 18 times the average salary. So he's not really the right person to be out there making this argument. And what he's saying is that if workers all ask for big pay rises, then that will lead to higher prices, and then we'll keep getting inflation spiraling, and then keep going round and round in circles. And so he doesn't have an argument here that in order to stop inflation getting out of control, it wouldn't be a good thing for people to just keep getting massive pay rises, then prices going up and going round and round in circles. However, if you earn more than £500,000 a year, you're not the right person to deliver that message, especially to people who are currently struggling with all the rising prices in the shop, the threat of the price cap going up. And, if you're on a low income and you've got those things going on, you're going to ask for the biggest pay rise you can possibly get. And realistically, it's probably not going to be that big. But if you're really struggling to make things add up, and then you hear Andrew Bailey saying this when he earns so much money, I think you just think it's a total joke.
Polly, just playing devil's advocate for a moment, does the size of his salary matter if the advice he's giving is correct?
In a way, not at all. But the question is, first of all, is the advice that he's giving correct? Is the Bank of England taking the right approach on inflation? A lot of the inflationary pressures seem to be coming from supply constraints, which we can expect may, we hope, unwind over the next few months. A big chunk of it comes from energy prices, which aren't then connected in the same way into that kind of consumer demand that creates the cycles of inflation that he is worried about. And, lots of much more thoughtful and clever economists than I certainly are questioning some of their judgment and their approach at the moment to managing this potentially quite huge inflation shock that, 9 months ago they were telling us was not going to happen. On the inflationary point, though, let's just assume that he's right and that we do need to get people to try and kind of tighten their belts in that way, try and be as measured as possible in the pay rises they offer as employers and the pay rises they ask for, and try and keep prices down. Well, then he's just not the right messenger, because whether it's justified or not, lots of people will take the reaction that John's just described. Frankly, he gets paid a lot more than I do, this Andrew Bailey. So I feel a bit of that kind of politics of envy as well. So he's not the right messenger. If this message matters, you actually need to think much more creatively about how are you going to build bridges of relationships with those trade unions, with citizens who are the right messengers, and not be so, I guess, tin-eared as to imagine that you, rich guy, standing on the steps of the Bank of England, lecturing people about their wages is the way to get this thing you say is important to actually happen.
Yes, it's